Hey folks, Sophia here. Today I wanted to talk to you about the dual prop autocannon Rifter. This is a part of my dual prop solo PvP Nullsec frigate series, and I'm not going to be rehashing all of the basics of dual prop, so if you haven't seen the first big comprehensive video in the playlist, you might want to go watch it first. I had an absolute blast piloting the Rifter, and I honestly think it is the least gimmicky and the most generally capable, or at least flexible, of all of the frigates I've flown for this dual prop style playlist so far. It just felt natural, I guess. And we should hop into the fitting window to see why, eh? Alright, so we have top tier T2 200mm autocannons in the highs, MWD and afterburner, because dual prop is life, and a scram for tackle. I go for a T2 here, which I'll explain why later. In the lows, DCU and small ancil for our tank, and gyro for more damage. I'll also talk about this empty slot in just a sec. And then for rigs, we have more damage, and then some speed and agility. Now I want to point out, with just this one polycarbon, we're already at sub 3 second align, with my skills at least. So this means that you could plop a refuge in the lows for more, what's it called now? A multi-spectrum coating in the lows for more tank. And since we only have 1.3 of CPU left, we're not going to really have room for anything else, except, of course, what I'm going for in the lows, which is a nano. Live and die by the speed and agility, right? Okay, and already, with that one rig slot still free, we are faster than the Executioner, tankier than the Kestrel, and, drumroll please, popping in our high damage T2 ammo. With heat, we are spitting out over 250 DPS. For reference, the Atron does 225, the Executioner 200, Hookbill I think 175, Kestrel 150, and then the Slasher and Condor would come in around 125. And I think this is why I found the dual prop Rifter so natural and fun to fly. It's reaching into that hit and run territory of assault frigates and combat scepters that is my jam. Now those T2 ships can reach all the way up to like 400 DPS, which is still a different ballpark, but I mean the Rifter is doing double the damage of a Slasher, so it's at least straddling the tiers, perhaps. What's even nicer is that the Rifter isn't damage type locked. Like for that massive 265 of hail, you do need to be using hail, which is explosive. But you also have EMP, phase plasma infusion, which do EM, thermal, and explosive at 200 DPS. So you have Hail Never Fails for more than the Atron can even do with its blasters, or selectable damage type to deal with shields or whatever else, at close to what the Atron can do with its kin thermal locked hybrid ammo. I mean, it's great. The close range faction ammo also has significantly better tracking than Hail, which brings me to tracking. So autocannons have worse tracking than blasters, but better tracking than pulse lasers. Unlike the Slasher, the Rifter does not get a bonus to tracking, and there are many situations where we're going to want to try and get under our opponent's guns. So to help with that, what I go for in this final rig slot is a metastasis rig. Small projectile metastasis adjuster, which gives us a nice 15% bonus to tracking speed. This is the exact same thought process of what I put on the Executioner, right? The option to try and orbit some things, and overall better damage application all the time, even if it's just brawling or keep at range kiting. Now projectile ammo, yikes, it is complicated enough to make a whole video on, I think. But it also has ammo that is bonus for tracking, at the cost of greatly reduced damage, from 200 down to 137 when I go with depleted uranium. This is why I don't bring it in the Slasher, because it just ends up making the Slasher's damage too piddling. And deciding what ammo to use amongst all of these is so nuanced and complex, especially since projectiles have the longest reload time. I mean, most of the time I just send it, and then afterwards I can't even figure out if it was the right call or not when looking at the raw damage and type and application, etc., even in retrospect. One ammo I do understand, though, is our long-range barrage. And this leads into the niche that the Rifter dominates, which is scram kiting with explosive damage turrets. Very similar to the Executioner's scram kiting with EM damage turrets. I haven't really mentioned this yet, but the Rifter does have a bonus to fall off, same as the Atron. However, the hybrid weapons that an Atron uses can't really take advantage of that bonus. So if you didn't know, optimal range is how far away you can apply 100% of your damage to, and then fall off is where you can apply 50% of your damage to. It's technically not a linear relationship, but you can estimate it as one, with like 100% at optimal, 50% at fall off, and then 0% at double fall off. Though technically I think you're still doing like 5% there as the line slopes off. Now lasers have a really long optimal range with a rapid short fall off beyond that. It's kind of like an all or nothing. You're either doing 100% optimal range or missing. Hybrids are kind of in between medium optimal and medium fall off. It's still kind of all or nothing. You don't want to be fighting in fall off with hybrid weapons. Projectiles, though, have a tiny optimal range and then a really long fall off. So their damage output sort of gradually shifts with range, and it's very normal, like necessary, to fight within fall off with autocannons. So the Atron with neutron blasters and long range null ammo has an optimal of, let's say, 3 kilometers and then a fall off to 8 kilometers thanks to the hull bonus. So it's only going to be doing 50% at 8 kilometers of scram range of its damage with null, which is like 120. So it's going to be doing 60 DPS if it tries to scram kite, and that's just too low for it to be viable. The Rifter, on the other hand, is in the middle of fall off at scram range of 8 kilometers, right? You can see the fall off there is 16. So that means it's doing 3/4 of its 160 DPS, which is 40, 80, 120 DPS, and perfectly viable as a scram kiter. All right, enough fitting talk, am I right? Let's load up all the ammo, nanite, and see some combat footage. I am going to try and split it up to start with brawling encounters, move into the transversal tanking ones, and finally do some scram range kiting at the end. So here I am in Goonswarm staging, and things are hopping. Neutral gangs, standing fleet zipping around. Lots going on as I try and isolate a target to engage. I noticed this Sunesis, which is interesting. It's a combat bonus destroyer, but you very rarely see them used in combat, other than by new, unskilled players, because it's middle of the road, low, flat damage bonuses for all weapon types, instead of better focused racial destroyer-based bonuses on a particular weapon system, make it just not that great. Or at least not as good as you could get with a regular T1 destroyer and full skills. The Sunesis is able to insta-warp though. It has a sub 2 second align time, so it's often used for hauling in high sec or looting/salvaging on an active grid, which I think is what could be going on here. I need to be careful though, because goons love their bait in and around their home system. Like if it seems too good to be true, it often is. And you'll quote unquote catch a procurer or something, only to find yourself tackled and then swarmed by others. The Sunesis is on a wreck, but looking at it, I don't see any salvager animations, and it's hanging out there way too long to actually be looting, so something is up. If this Sunesis is brick tanked tackle bait, where they just hold me for friends, then I'm cooked. But if it's actually like combat that trying to encourage a fight that they think they'll win because I'm just in this T1 Rifter, then I stand a solid chance. The Sunesis also relies on a flight of 4 light drones, so I'll have a good chunk of time where they need to be launched and get on me and have their damage applying. We'll all be blasting away throughout that period. So I'm burning out into warpable range, and we'll be going for it shortly. Hail is the ammo of choice here for sure to try and kill it as quickly as possible, and it's fine as explosive because the Society of Conscious Thought chips, that's the Sunesis as well as things like the Praxis and the Gnosis, have even resists, like flat across the board. I should look and see if it has weapon systems, but I don't, and we'll just need to adjust my approach on the fly if it's, say, blasters instead of rockets or whatever. So overheat, lock it up. It looks like it actually might just be a salvager. But then the Newt and full tackle land with a volley of rockets, so they are indeed baiting. Though they do seem to be reloading into a different ammo and haven't launched drones. Now a Loki is decloaked and is warping over, but the Sunesis didn't have a tank and are dead before the Loki could help out. The fit shows that they did actually have a small shield booster. I was breaking so hard I didn't even notice it. And it's faction with an Abyssal DCU on there too. Can I make it back in time to grab it? Activity around the gate is picking up again, but I managed to snag the loot and warp off. I think it was just a newer player with a questionable fit who was trying to entice me into fighting upper class so they could punch down and get a win, but they ended up getting beat instead. Now I've got my eye on this tornado. It might seem suicidal to take on a battlecruiser in a T1 frigate, but I promise you it's not. The large gun battlecruisers like the Tornado and Naga, they don't have a drone bay, nor a utility high, so any sort of standard fit simply can't hurt you. You're just under their guns no matter what guns they have. Furthermore, the positioning of this ship is signaling that it's a sniper fit. These are extreme glass cannon, insta-lock, insta-blap, insta-warp, with zero considerations for tackle or tank. And I burned down many right in front of their friends as they come piling in to help. In frigates that do twice as much DPS as this Rifter, to be fair. Okay, so here alarm bells should be going off that he is letting me get a warping on him. But choosing to do nothing looks the exact same as unwittingly doing nothing and being distracted watching YouTube and doing nothing. So in I go. Hail for max damage, assuming equal shield and armor base HP. I burn in at an angle, MWD or AB would be fine here, and it's a trap. Immediately overheat the AB and align out at an angle. But instead of pulling away, I'm getting reeled in. They are running afterburner themselves and dual web. So they have range control over me. Nothing else for it but to turn in and try and kill them. Or maybe go after that Mullus if it decides to warp in and gets too close. I do want to point out how much damage I'm doing to this guy, like breaking his, what I believe is a medium Ancel armor up. Now I wouldn't be surprised if they were rocking buffer hull too, but you can see how I would kill them eventually if left to duke it out one-on-one. And if this guy wasn't tanked at all, he would have been close to dying in that half minute. Like, a Tornado's going to have 10,000 EHP with no mods, and I'm doing 250 DPS, so yeah, that's 40 seconds, right? I mean, of course he was bait, brawler tanked. Always take the bait. Here I see a Garmur on D-scan. Swap into EM in anticipation. And indeed, they are landing on my gate. The vast majority of Garmurs are fit for point kiting with missiles, so if I can land scram and get on top of it, it should be a quick, very shiny kill. I should mention I have been burnt by a dual prop with scram and web rocket Garmur that got under my Retribution's pulse lasers before, so that does flit through my head in this situation every time. It's pretty moot since they're almost certainly just going to jump here. But shockingly, they try an MWD out, and I have to fight through the surprise to land scram, but fumble activating my MWD as I overheat it instead. Then, seeing my MWD is off, I think I'm scrammed, the Retry death flashbacks, so I AB after them as my own scram drops. Fortunately, I think this is a really new pilot, and they don't take the opportunity to get their own MWD on. And yeah, from there it's all over as they're untanked. Quick pod kill, just in case they're snaked or something. Implants are not uncommon in a 100 million-ish frigate hull. But no dice. This is a fairly standard gate camping type fit, except that battery there means, yeah, they're just really inexperienced with PvP. Of course, we've seen many experienced players throw fleet scepters at proper combat ships before in this playlist, so who knows? I'm pretty sure you at home, even with zero PvP experience, could handle that fight, though. Probably better than I could, actually. Okay, moving on from pure face-melting brawl to aiming for a bit of transversal, right? I'm over in Brave Space now and playing with a Slicer. This is a very similar situation to the Garmur in that Slicers will pretty much always be set up to point kite with Scorch and little to no tank, and they're quite competent at it. If I can scram them, I'll have range control and can rapidly close in for the kill, and if they can hold me with point outside of scram where they are significantly faster under MWD, then I'm going to be toast. Well, I guess I can try for a slingshot as demonstrated in earlier videos, or at least attempted to be demonstrated. I demonstrated the attempts. Unlike with Scepter, though, with no guns, I'll be eating a face full of lasers throughout trying to slingshot, so yeah, I want to catch them and start the fight at 0. This is all, of course, assuming neither of us can simply jump gate, so there's a lot of maneuvering to try and start the fight at the range each of us wants. I did have a chance to try and snag them there on the gate after they aggressed, but I wasn't fully prepared mentally or my ship, and they might have drifted out of my scram, so I'll be patient. You can see they're trying to kick things off at 20 kilometers, while I would much prefer 0 kilometers. I should mention that a Slicer will probably have a small Ancil Repper, 50-50 on if they have a DCU. So it is going to be roughly the same tank as my Rifter, though probably doesn't have the cap to get off more than a couple of charges in a row. And it'll be doing roughly the same DPS under Scram, with like 250 with Conflag and 200 with Multi-Freak. In a pure brawl at 0, the Rifter should still get the win thanks to the natural EM resists and armor versus lasers. But if the Slicer can get in some softening blows while the Rifter is setting up at 0, then things could be a lot tighter. Of course, the extra mid on a Rifter, which I'm using for an afterburner, but a web for control here would work fine too, allows me to orbit the Slicer, and autocannons outtrack pulse lasers, plus I have that metastasis rig. My opponent, though, went with no Repper, reasonable enough if only flying around your home systems, where you have friendly structures, and yeah, they were just banking on not getting caught. Look at that. They did have a Repper, but never activated it, and were beam fit for true extreme long-range kitey plinking, and very dedicated to a specific range, as they only had ultraviolet ammo with nothing else available. You might think the ×2 cap rigs here is a bit sus, but while I've never flown the beam version of the Slicer, I have flown the pulse, and it's really tricky to manage cap. Yeah, here's the standard fleeing pulse version of the Slicer. And note that even with the Repper off as depicted in this image, it still isn't cap stable. So to fly this, you actually need to manage use of your point of all things. You MWD away from hostiles while turning or heating your MWD to keep them around 25 kilometers away and just like smack them with Scorch throughout. And then you need to anticipate the moment they realize they might die, because they can warp off before then, but like once they realize they won't catch you and should break off from chasing you, that's the second before that you actually have to turn back in and tap them with the point, which you can only hold for like 10 seconds before you're out of cap to hold them for the actual kill. So yeah, swapping an optimal range rig or two for cap rigs actually makes sense if you're trying to hold point on something for like a full minute or whatever to burn it down. Okay, that was a bit of an aside. Back to dual prop under Scram instead of this fancy point kite business, right? Okay, that Slicer might have been a bit more brawl than orbit, so let me chase this Arty Svipul through a gate and try to take it on. Depending on where we both spawn in, I'll be using either MWD or AB to angle towards them, mitigating that first massive volley as much as possible and get set up under their guns. I want to start moving before they load grid so I'm not stationary coming out of decloak lock when they insta-lock me. I use the AB to spiral in and slide up under their guns. I do need to be a little more careful than usual, as the recent ESS changes mean you are much more likely to encounter Svipuls and Confessors with afterburners. I want to be orbiting at 500 meters to be as close to optimal as I can, and orbiting at 500 with AB will destroy my own tracking, so I toggle it off. I get very unlucky that they happen to be firing as I slow boat with no AB from 3 kilometers into 1, and turn the AB back on to not die to a glancing blow while I rep up. A Crusader shows up and I decide to try and skedaddle. I line out, but I do need to turn and spiral out or I'll get alphaed off by the Arty. The Crusader leaves though, so I head back in on this Svipul. This time I decide to orbit a bit further out, around 3 kilometers with AB on at first. I'll be doing a little less damage than at optimal, but I'm still only barely into fall off, so like 95% or whatever. And orbiting at 3 kilometers with AB on will have roughly the same transversal as 500 meters AB off on the Svipul, my target, while also keeping my absolute speed, and hopefully transversal if I'm lucky, up against any other enemies who arrive. And indeed, the Crusader returns. With no paste, I'm doubtful I could get out now, and the Svipul shields are almost down, so I can taste blood. I try to get a good shot or two off on the Svipul before having to go AB on again as the Crusader closes in. But it doesn't look good. And indeed, I'm popped just as the Svipul enters hull. A fun fight, obviously a win if the Crusader isn't around. That Vedmak managed to get on the kill mail too. But what can I expect when fighting beside a system that has over 500 enemy pilots in it, right? Hanging out on a gate in Goon Station, and a Crusader comes over to say hi. I jump to check they don't have friends waiting on the other side, and put an extra gate between anyone coming to help them from their Keepstar as well. Everything looks clear though, so let's get it on. The plan is to use fusion for explosive and kinetic damage, and orbit tight, hoping they don't have multi-frequency. The Crusader does have a tracking bonus, and even with my better tracking guns and that metastasis rig, we essentially are going to have the same tracking, and they do double my DPS. So I really need to hope they're stuck with just Scorching Conflag. Once we're locked in, we seem to be trading grazing blows, and that's not really going to work out for me, as their partial hits do double the damage of my partial hits. And there, do you see that? I have frickin' hail loaded and don't realize. In fact, I didn't realize until compiling this video, so it also informs the next fight you're gonna see. In fact, I think this Crusader does only have Conflag, and I would be eking out a win with Fusion, but instead my own tracking is busted by my ammo choice, and I'm cooked. Not ammo choice, ammo usage. I tried turning off the AB to help my tracking, but given my opponent has the same tracking, it ends up as expected. And yeah, look at me checking his gun type here in my kill mail for dual pulse or something, because I'm genuinely confused about what happened. But I am not discouraged. A few days later, I find myself another Crusader, and this time I'm going with depleted uranium, which is the high tracking ammo. Keep transversal up as much as possible and hope to whittle him down. One thing that had come to me after that first fight was that Crusaders do struggle with cap. The one I fly, I even bring Mind Flood drugs. So dragging the fight out as the added bonus that they can't run their repper forever. Dropping off some loot from an indie Sino venture I popped a few minutes ago, and waiting for this Crusader to come over. Come on, buddy. There we go. We both want to start right at 0. The Crusader probably mistakenly, thinking they overwhelm me in a few volleys, and they'd be better off at 5 kilometers or so. Though actually, trying to get under a normal Rifter's guns would be a viable strat, so I don't know. Regardless, we're off. It's not as easy holding a tight orbit with just an AB and not a web, so at times there are straight patches where more damage comes in. There was a little break there with no damage from the Crusader, which was them swapping from Conflag to multi-frequency. If I were using Fusion, we'd now have the same tracking, and I'd be in the same situation as I was, Conflag versus Hail. But with depleted uranium, I've still got better tracking than them, and I'm likely doing a tiny bit more damage. Only a tiny bit, since my okay hits are doing the same as their minimal hits, due to their much higher base damage. They stop shooting again, and this time it is because they are capped out. Though I don't notice at this moment because I'm so worried about my own capacitor. I try to get my AB off to land some solid shots while they can't shoot back and can't repair. They let their scram drop and don't turn it back on, which is a great call on their part. I'm out of pace, so heat my prop to reduce both our damage, but they still managed to get a full hit on me to pop me while in deep hull, a couple volleys away from me killing them. Ah, so close. If you watch that fight again, you'll see that I under-rep early, so I take some hull damage, and then over-rep once, which wastes an anti-charge. Like, if I avoid either of those mistakes, then I'd win that fight. Of course, my opponent could have started with multi-frequency, which would have helped them, or conversely, they could have just not handled being out of cap so expertly by focusing on the most important thing, the guns, and instead tried to run their repper, which would have helped me. So who knows? It's safe to say, though, that the Rifter with DU, that's depleted uranium, or actually the other tracking ammo, titanium sabot, it actually might be a slightly better damage profile because it has kinetic instead of thermal. Ah, damn these projectile ammo's complexity. Right, sorry, it's safe to say that the Rifter can take on the Crusader, right? It's just going to be more challenging than trying to do so in the Slasher or Condor. And yeah, for all of these ships, you're probably going to need some help from the Crusader using Conflag too much as well. Scram chitin time. Put that T2 scram range to work. And Eris and Thorax are on the other side of this gate, and there we can see them flashing through. I take a quick look at the Eris and see it is running electron blasters, so it is my ideal target. Shortest weapon system in the game, plus an explosive armor hole, only 2 mids, and the Eris only has a tracking bonus for gunnery, so perfect target to scram kite. I do need to get rid of this Thorax first, but amazingly the Eris aggresses on me, giving up its ability to jump gate. This is absolutely a mistake, though not uncommon to enthusiastic, inexperienced Dictor pilots who want to do damage rather than focus on controlling the battlefield. Then again, it has a web, which, I don't know. I mean, I guess the bubble acts like a point, and then you have MWD and web to get on top of any ships that are slower than you under MWD. But that also only works if your opponent doesn't have a scram. Regardless, the Eris is now stuck there for a bit, and I'm hoping the Thorax will engage on the far side here, giving me a minute to go kill the Eris. Swap into barrage for my scram kiting, and rep up on the damage so I can survive a face full of void or whatever from the Eris if needed. I'm not worried about staying power at all, since I expect to be taking no damage from this Eris once I set up at range. Though they can be pretty tanky, so over-repping there was bad, just in case I need charges to get out from under the Thorax if the fight takes over a minute. The Thorax is kind enough to red box me, and here we go. Now technically my base speed is faster than the Eris, so I could maintain range even if I had a web. Also I have a scram, so I could maintain range with just that and my MWD. However, it's still nice to have extra range control thanks to the AB. There really is nothing else to say about this fight, though, as I slowly chew through them. I do hold heat initially, thinking I want to save it to break through their armor rep if they have one, but I'm not sure if that's the right call or if I should be trying to get them down as fast as I can because I know my time is very limited. They do swap to null, which is the right call, but with electrons, it's a hopeless effort. The Eris has a bonus to not being slowed down by plates, so most fit either 1 or 2 400mm. This guy, we can see some small armor repair firing, so we can tell because of how slowly they're going down, they have at least one. And a repper, which looks to be ancillary charges. They're deceptively small reps because of the plate HP. It does not look like I'm going to be able to kill them before the Thorax gets back, which is blaster, scram, and web, and can field a flight of light drones, so I might as well decide now whether to bail out or go all in. One thing to consider is that if they are ancil, which I suspect they are, they're now out of pace, so that'll help me get them down faster, even with a Thorax on me. And I mean, either way, of course I'm going for it, right? So I start to align, trying to keep 5 to 10 kilometers from the Eris, while getting some range and transversal up on the Thorax. I'm now double webbed though, so can barely move even with the heated AB, and decide to turn back in directly at the Eris and try and get a few quality, closer to optimal range and low transversal shots in. And it works, right as the Thorax takes me down. Now, snagging 100 millionist T2 Desi in my 5 millionist T1 frigate by revealing that them trying to catch me was in fact me trying to catch them, and getting the kill in front of their anti-frigate cruiser friend trying in vain to help, I mean, that is what it is all about, folks. The true 1v1 Crusader duels or whatever are intellectually stimulating and fun too, but this sort of stuff, it's like that Svipul baiting for a Sleipnir that I popped and escaped to my Condor in the first vid. It just takes the cake. And yeah, that's why I enjoy this dual prop Rifter so much, and it felt so natural. Flexibility to fight anything, or almost anything, and the DPS there to get those cheeky kills. Okay, I think that's all the fully commentated combat footage I have for y'all today. However, speaking of fight anything, I do want to talk about the engagement profile of the Rifter a bit. I'll put some B-roll combat on in the background. So the dual prop Rifter fit I used does let you take on most frigates, and some destroyers, depending on their fit, like if they're sporting the longer range small weapon system, that is. But you still can't really hang with assault frigates. Well, the Rail Harpy and any Retribution are fine, but not the others. And unfortunately, like I discussed with the Kestrel, the Rifter is not really mistaken for lost fleet tackle, and as such I did not have random interceptors throwing themselves at me the way I did with the Slasher and Condor. Even the Rail Harpies and Tyrannuses, or Tyranni, that I encountered were very risk-adverse, and I often found myself being chased by Wolves and Enyos and other assault frigates that I couldn't take on. I suspect that the Rifter is not respected quite as much as the Kestrel is, but only because you see the Rifter flown by competent solo roamers a lot less than the Kestrel, at least nowadays. Rifters used to be all the rage 2 decades ago. Face of the game, they were on the icon and stuff. And I think Rifters even got a buff a few years back when the utility high was removed, so if anything, they're probably underused. Personally, I think the Rifter and Kestrel are pretty much equal, and my playstyle leans heavily towards the Rifter for the better face meltiness, and more appropriate slot layout for dual prop, I guess. I don't think the Rifter would be that great for a newer player. When you're relying on quickly applying tons of damage, you really do want to max out that damage with skills. And when you're trying something else, well, again, you saw how borderline some of the orbiting was I engaged in, where you really want max application skills along with those damage skills. Plus, it's tight on CPU, though I guess you could meta the scram. No NOS to help with caps, you need your capacitor skills, I don't know. Also, the Rifter's true wheelhouse is that explosive scram kiting. Well, there really aren't that many extra short-range blaster autocannon boats flying around, other than the Eris, Tyrannus, Claw. Although, to be fair, those are things you just have to run away from in the Atron, and you can take one on the Rifter, so I don't know, maybe the Rifter is just a better option than the Atron for this style of play. I mean, I guess you'll just have to take it out and see, eh? Still, it is a lot easier as new players to go out in something that has a bit more of a specialized tactical approach to keep things simpler, right? Like the Condors always be orbiting with AB on and using kinetic range 95% of the time approach. Actually, speaking of the Condor, I've been trying a dual prop rocket probe fleet issue. Speaking of the Condor, it's rockets as well. And this probe FI might actually be my favorite of these ships to fly so far. 4 mids, 3 lows, Nosferatu, any flavor of rocket, and bloody combat probes to boot for getting around on grid. It's delicious. But I guess you'll just have to subscribe, or check back later at least, after I've gotten enough footage to put together a video. Okay folks, that's it. Hope you got something from this.